We got to spend a bunch of time with our speaker in the last couple of days, and I think my favorite thing to note is that he flies RC planes, gliders, helicopters. Very interesting man. He's not going to be talking about that today, but I thought I'd share that. You can give the real introduction when the time comes. But I'd love to introduce our host today, Anna Khan. She is a general partner at CRV, one of the oldest, most iconic venture firms in the globe. She has been there for a number of years, invests in all kinds of things, enterprise, AI, things that people around here tend to do. CRV has invested in incredible companies like DoorDash, Vercel, Cribble, Twitter, if you've heard of any of these, so a couple of the small guys. They're really, really an incredible firm, and we're so happy that she's here today. Before this, she was at Bessemer Ventures and just got to see a lot of the rise of all the technologies that have led us to where we are today. And before that, she was in mobile ads in the very early days of the smartphone. I work in mobile app technology, and it's always fun to hear, stories from the early days of the industry. Also, a couple of fun things. Did not go to MIT. Just kidding. Not that fun. But you went to Stanford, Harvard Business School, grew up in Lahore, Pakistan. And outside of all of this, people know that I'm a freestyle rapper, but she is a published poet. Yeah, that's the correct response. The oohs, the ahs. She's an incredible poet. And other fun fact, her husband spoke downstairs earlier today and was my first investor. So I feel like she's, always been there supporting me. And I'm very happy today to have her lead this conversation with Brad. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. This, I promise this panel is mostly about Brad and Brad's work, but I appreciate the very kind introduction. And I want to get right to Brad's illustrious career. And so maybe, without any more intros, Brad, kind of tell us a little bit about the start of your career. And you've been at kind of 3 or 4 iconic companies. Walk us through that till sort of how you got to Cobot at the end of it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I went to MIT, course 6.3, undergrad in Eng. And happened to graduate right during the internet boom. And so I joined Netscape straight out of school. Netscape ended up acquired by AOL. I didn't join AOL. I instead jumped to a small speech recognition startup. So a lot of the customer service conversations earlier this morning were quite relevant to my history. We started that, right before the dot-com bubble burst. I was the founding engineer, platform architect for a company called Tell Me Networks. In 2007, we sold that to Microsoft for $800 million, and instead of joining Microsoft, I jumped ship and I joined Amazon. Ended up leading worldwide website operations, and then jumped into the e-commerce platform architect role, was promoted to distinguished engineer, and that distinguished engineer, you kind of got the chance to work on the things you were excited to work on. And I was excited to work on kind of large-scale transformation programs and early kind of incubator programs. So I worked on their early drone program, Premier, helped kind of acquire the first couple companies behind the Alexa program, given my speech recognition background. Then did a few things like tech readiness for the first Prime Day. And then in 2017, I was a distinguished engineer on Jeff Wilke's staff as the CEO of Amazon Consumer, and he had commissioned a study looking at a 5 to 10 year projection for Amazon. And it said by 2021, Amazon would have 1 million employees. In 2017, Amazon had 220,000 employees and was kind of staring down a peak season where they weren't going to be able to hire enough people. Amazon had acquired Kiva Systems in 2012, had a lot of success with that deployment, had about 50,000 of those robots deployed. But in the intervening 5 years, had not really been able to move the needle on additional robotic systems. And so I raised my hand and said, my background's been large-scale distributed systems largely, but I know a lot about leading enterprise change and transformation, and I'd be excited to learn more about robotics and operation. And so over the next 4 years, grew from 50,000 robots to over 500,000 robots, launched 50 new programs, learned a lot about what it takes to be successful getting robotics deployed at scale. In the middle of COVID, My wife and I decided we really wanted to get back to the Bay Area. My wife's from the Bay Area. And then we also decided that I really wanted to get back to the hypergrowth startup world. So instead of doing my own thing, I joined Scale AI as their CTO. Fascinating company, and a front row seat because we did the data labeling for almost all the most ambitious AI projects and self-driving and other industries. Scale's still a phenomenal business. Ultimately, taught me a lot about the AI space is incredibly dynamic. And I mean, we see it today. Like they're just step function changes. It's a tricky space to build really successful businesses. And so it's really exciting to see what everyone's been doing here. Ultimately, after a year and a half, I decided Scale wasn't quite the right fit for me. And so helped hire a new engineering leader. And I also decided I still had an itch for robotics. And so formed the company Cobot in May of 2022. So we're 2.5 years in. Really with the thesis that there are two types of robots in the world right now. Really, most of what we see deployed are single-purpose robots like Amazon's Kiva system, usually in highly constrained environments, fenced off, and that works really well for companies like Amazon, where you can design your own 800,000 square foot building from scratch. It doesn't work as well when you're trying to bring robots into either places that don't have the scale and volume and predictability that Amazon has, or maybe just don't want to put the capital intensity in, or just using older, more distressed buildings. And so we had looked a lot at humanoids at Amazon. Really excited about the tech. Looked a lot at use cases and realized that the system was too complicated. The AI wasn't there for a balancing bipedal system. The safety rateability wasn't really going to be there. It's going to be too expensive, too many actuators, and it wasn't clear that associates were going to be that comfortable working around humanoids. But when we looked at all the use cases, there's a lot of material movement in the world that could use something human capable that could move boxes, totes, and carts around. And lots of use cases for that in Amazon. But if you could build that system, it works in legacy logistics facilities. It works in the resupply pathways of manufacturing systems. It works in hospitals. And we just, when I left Scale, I realized still no one had built that robot. And so that's what we're building at Cobot. And we're in the field now. We're 65 people. We've raised about 150 million, and are just, next year is going to be a big expansion. Very exciting.
It's amazing. Let's go back to sort of when you made that decision of not staying at Microsoft and going over to the Amazon side. What was it about Amazon's vision at the time? And maybe you knew that there was something they were up to on the robotics side. Maybe you had an inkling. How did you make that decision?
It's interesting. So coming out of school, I was really excited about platforms. I was really excited about this problem of how do you separate the invariant elements that you can do consistently in software from the degrees of freedom that you want to allow people to be able to express. So at Net Center, I was doing the personalization platform behind my Netscape and a lot of the technology there. At Tell Me, it was domain-specific language, voice XML, that would let you specify how these voice dialogues should work. When I left Tell Me, I was looking for that next platform, right? Who was investing in platforms? This is 2006, 2007. The VC community was not excited about platforms at the time. I talked to a couple startups and they wanted to build a platform and they were like, we're only going to raise 2 to 3 million. I'm like, you're not going to build a platform with 2 to 3 million. That's not. And Amazon was building multiple platforms at the time. They were building AWS. They were building an e-commerce platform. They were building, a digital devices platform. They weren't doing much with robotics at the time. And they really hadn't thought of their fulfillment center network as a platform much yet. But I saw that Amazon was making those kind of investments. And at the time, Azure and GCP and other things weren't, right? There weren't other companies. They were really application focused. And so that's what drew me to Amazon. I mean, almost 14-year career at Amazon. I couldn't have been happier with the experience there. But it let me do a number of different things and ultimately, robotics foundation for them.
And then when you transferred over to working in robotics for Amazon, and I think, before this session we chatted, I think Amazon still is responsible for the largest acquisition ever in robotics when they acquired Kiva Robotics, I think for $775 million in 2012. Do you think that an acquisition of that size could only really happen at a company that had Amazon-like scale? Like, when you think of robots at large, does it have to come with a scalable platform? Because if you see a world where robots are an everyday thing, it has to be more ubiquitous than that, right? But at the time, the Kiva acquisition, do you think it could only have happened at a place like Amazon because they had the operations for it?
I do think Amazon was fairly uniquely positioned there. Now, we should remember Amazon in 2012 was nowhere near the scale of Amazon now, right? But what Amazon did right, I think, with the acquisition of Kiva was, and this is what I advise people in thinking about robotics, is what some companies try to do is just go pilot and test every robot out there, like you would try out Zoom or Google Chat and Hangouts. Like, you try them out, you figure out which one you like, and you use it. It doesn't really work like that in robotics because the technologies are not as turnkey as, say, a SaaS software system. And so what makes more sense is to pick very clearly, this is the technology that we believe can deliver the ROI for us, and find that partner that can deliver that for you, realizing that there's going to be some R&D still to be done. Now, there are a couple ways to do that. Well, Amazon didn't originally want to buy Kiva. They just wanted to buy 3,000 Kiva robots. And Kiva said, we can't do that because we wouldn't be able to serve any of our other customers. And Amazon said, serve us. And they said, well, we can't do that. So then Amazon said, well, then how about we buy the company? Because we still want the 3,000 robots. And, a negotiation ensued, and, a pretty good valuation was reached for that acquisition. And then, Amazon then progressively shut down the other systems, and now it's, captive to Amazon. I think that is a tricky thing for robotics companies, which is when you hit that curve and scale, you've got to be prepared to scale. Otherwise, that big company might come and just buy you out. But I think that's what I did when I took on robotics in 2017. Is Amazon had gone back to the playbook of just trying a bunch of things, and instead I said, no, we're going to cut this down. We had like 65 things we were trying. It's like, nope, we're cutting this down to 12. The 12 that we have conviction. And then the other key thing is to find a robotic building block. And I think this is where robotics startups fail sometimes, is you want a robotic building block that you can move to adjacent pathways easily. So the reason Amazon's gone from 50,000 to 750,000 robots is mostly on that Kiva foundation, but we moved it into sortation, we moved into other adjacencies. And so having a robotic building block that you can move to adjacent process paths with mostly software and ML adaptation, maybe small amount of hardware adaptation, is really the key to unlocking big scale.
And so, the Kiva acquisition happened in 2012, and I had just actually started investing, so I had entered VC at that time. And around the investment committee kind of partnership table, we all thought it was going to be a moment for robotics. And lo and behold, that didn't really happen. I mean, there was clearly things happening inside of Amazon, but from the investment world, we started moving on to mobile applications, cloud computing, developer tools. And now I would say in the last 2 years, robots are front and center. Obviously, with your startup, Cobot had an incredible fundraising round. Why do you think that has happened? Because when I think about robots, they actually don't have the same access to language and data that applications or software do. And so training robots is not as easy as training other systems, but yet the world is now thinking about robots front and center again. What happened like 12, 13 years later to bring us to that point again? And did we miss ignoring robotics for a decade? Like, what did investors miss doing that? There's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah, I mean,
much time.
Investors invested in a lot of robotics companies that haven't been very successful. and now we have a lot of robotics companies struggling to fundraise again right now. What happened at the beginning of this year, right? I mean, last year, everyone was really focused on what are going to be the applications of these LLMs, right? And then around the end of the year, there was a kind of secondary analysis that said, what's going to happen next, right? And I think everyone said it's going to be energy and robotics, pretty much. And so at the beginning of the year, there was this wave of like, what are the robotics things that we need to invest in? And really there were kind of two dominant theses, is it humanoids and is it foundation models for robotics? Is there an LLM equivalent? Is there a chat GPT equivalent for robotics? And you've seen, multi-$100 million raises in both those categories as everyone kind of looked to plow in and figure out who would likely be the winner in those spaces. I think a lot of those investments are going to be, there's going to be some hard feelings about how much they put in, how early, because the humanoid technology is very, very early, and really, I think, not the right fit. And the foundation model technology, we didn't really know how much of an intrinsic world model exists in these multimodal models and these video generation models, vision language action models. And I would say now, having spent, the better part of the last year pushing the limits of where those are at, the intrinsic world models in those systems are quite poor. And a given example, like you can ask ChatGPT to describe a swerve drive architecture, four wheels that, independently move, and it will describe it quite well. And you might actually even be able to ask it to like program a basic controller for one, and it will spit it out. Then you ask it to render a picture of a swerve drive, and you get a 6-wheeled traction drive. Like the image generation models have no idea what a swerve drive is. You go to a video generation model and you ask it to show a robot picking up a lemon or something, right? And you ask it, please don't move the camera. It doesn't process the please don't move a camera. The camera flies around cinematically because everything it's trained on has these cinematic motions. And so the fundamental world models that are derived in these multimodal are quite poor still. If those were really rich, we might be able to build a robotics foundation model very quickly. They are not, and we don't have the 13 trillion tokens of data to train a foundation model. So the foundation models are also going to take a long time. So humanoids, foundation models, I think 4 to 5 years, and then we'll figure. I mean, if companies have raised 300, 600 million, they'll be able to go a long time. But I think that's going to be a long time for investors not to see a lot of return. So our thesis is start with something that works with today's AI and gets better as AI gets better. And we're out in the field already, deploying robots and starting to, we've already moved, I think, a few thousand kilometers. We move about 500 carts a day in this logistics center. We just deployed. We just shipped our first robots to Mayo Clinic last week to do some cart movement for them. So we're just going to expand quickly, and as the AI gains, our robot gains capability.
That's great. And I know we're out of time, but I do want to maybe ask one of the audience questions. Brad, what is your number one tip to go from an amazing idea to a successful startup? It's a loaded question, but if you were to give the audience maybe 1 or 2 tips, what would they be?
All right. My key tip is hire a really amazing recruiter early, because you're going to try to hire a really amazing team. Obviously, there's founder-led recruiting, there's founder-led sales, there's founder-led fundraising. You can't get out of the fundraising, you can't get out of the founder-led sales, but a really great recruiter can help you build that team. And so I've built really amazing world-class engineering teams my whole career. I have never done it without an amazing recruiter. So that's my secret tip, is hire an amazing recruiter.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad.
Yes.